Welcome to Plain Talk. On Wednesday, we had a recap of the primary election. We had Julie Fedorchak, House candidate, who was successful in her five-way primary race over, four other candidates. Now we're going to be talking to the other top-of-the-ticket candidate in a competitive race. Kramer was on the race, too, but he wasn't facing any opposition. The Honorable Kelly Armstrong. So my co-host today is Corey Mock. He's sitting in for Chad Oban, who is out on another vacation. Chad's gonna.
I don't believe it's a family junket. They call it
family junket. Yeah, that's what it is this time. But Corey Mock sitting in for the first time as guest host and asked the question beforehand if he needed to be worried about titles and stuff with our guest Kelly, which is why I just called him the Honorable Kelly Armstrong, representative at large from North Dakota. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
It was a good election night for you.
It was a good election night, yeah. It's we worked really hard to do this stuff in the right way. I think the best thing that ever happened to me when I ran for Congress was running against Mac right away, knowing you're going to have a good candidate on the other side. I think 2 years ago when Karaman got in the race in August, we did that. So, we campaign every 2 years and we try and do it in a real grassroots barnstorm in North Dakota and do a lot of this stuff. And so it felt like we were doing really well all through the campaign. Polling said we were, but you all know it's the only one it's June 11th. So we had a great night. It was great.
Kelly started to say the only poll that matters is election day, which I think we were teasing everybody.
Then I knew I was going to get made fun of. So I thought.
No, what the thing about cliches is a lot of times they're true.
They're true, yeah.
But I think the answer to that is you guys know me, you know Roz Layton. We're state party chair, executive director. I'm nervous until the day after the election for everybody, not just me. I think if you don't approach an election that way, then you're doing it wrong.
For me, I obviously on the outside, I don't have to worry about winning or losing these things. I just cover them. But for me, the worst part is like the last 24 hours. Is because it doesn't feel like I can report anything that means usually. This time around we had the mysterious text messages flying around, which were certainly worthy of cover. But it just doesn't feel like the votes are not in. I don't know what else I can do in terms of writing and trying to inform people or break stories. It's just I'm in a holding pattern and I hate it.
I tell you guys a fun story from election night. So I used to have to do this right when juries were out. You sit, when a jury's out, they're out. Sometimes they come back in an hour, sometimes they come back in 2 days, and you really can't do anything. So when the AP called the race, the AP reporter, and we were in we were all upstairs. We had a ton of supporters there, but then as the results started going in, we brought my mom, my dad, my wife, my son, Michelle and her whole family, my whole team, Roz, and all of that. And we're in a conference room watching this. And so the AP calls the race, and I get a call from the AP reporter, Jack Dura. I go out to take the phone call, and I forget that I'm better at that because I've done it before. And my entire team, it was like Lord of the Flies in there. My mom and dad went upstairs. Michelle and her husband went upstairs. I have no idea how we're actually going to move through giving this speech. And I come back in, and it's just like chaos. And I'm like, come on, guys, act like you've done this before. And so it was really funny. And it was just in a really neat way with the closest people to me over the last 4 months. It was just really fun to see how excited everybody was for it.
Kelly, you saw the polls, and I think you've spoken that things turned out pretty much how you had been expecting. They were trending that way. You never really make any assumptions until the election day, but it had been looking good. So I imagine there was a good sense of optimism. What surprises did you end up looking back at it? How is this campaign change or turned out that you weren't expecting?
If you want an honest answer, 6 years in Congress, being in the middle of everything, like all of the things that touch buttons. On any given day, you can go to my Facebook stuff and somebody will call me a good for nothing rhino, or I'm a Trump apologist, or I'm a Democrat, or all of that. And so, as volatile as politics seems to be, by the way, I think this was all around the state too. I was really surprised at how much, we didn't do things, I mean, more differently, but events in Grand Forks that used to have 20 people had 150. And so you think, I mean, statewide and all of that. So I mean, that's what really surprised us in a really good way. It was humbling, like the amount of, it wasn't just the polling, you could feel it on the ground. I mean, and you deal with that and the enthusiasm and that different part of it. But I mean, we're in a pretty volatile and cynical political time. And we had just, I mean, a lot of support from the cross section of the Republican Party, and that was really nice.
How do you correlate that then with the fact that the turnout was kind of down? I mean, it's a presidential election year. We had, I'm making the same mistake I made yesterday where I'm looking at it, but turnout was down. I mean, the last presidential election, we had 160,000 votes. We didn't get anywhere near that this time around. So you had more people at events. I mean, that's good, but they didn't turn up at the polls. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I will be frustrated when turnout's down, not like 80% plus. I mean, I just wish it was always that way. I think it's more, I mean, it's, this is the first step, a lot of that, but I mean, and we deal with this stuff, but I mean, think of how many races were final on Tuesday. City commission races, and I mean, and competitive ones. In Western North Dakota, there weren't a ton of competitive races, but in the eastern part of the state, there were a lot, and a lot of good candidates running. And I mean, it's just, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we'll talk to Michael Howe and figure out how we do it. I mean, it's so easy to vote in North Dakota. I mean, it's just so easy. We're the only state without voter registration. I think one of the unsung things is how smoothly it went from everywhere across the state. Part of that. I mean, really, like, it was like, I didn't hear, we're part of the campaign. If things are crazy, we're going to know about it. So I give the Secretary of State's office a lot of credit, but we got to figure out how to give people, more engaged who want to do it. And if not for governor or congressman, but like your city commission race, your school board race.
With Howe and his predecessor, Secretary Al Jaeger would frequently say that it's not his job to encourage turnout. His job is to administer a secure and efficient election, and it's up to the parties and the candidates to promote turnout. Are we unintentionally doing something that is having the reverse effect? I mean, where are the parties going wrong where we're suppressing turnout, especially when you have as many competitive races as they are? I wonder if we're fighting against our own best interest in getting voters to the polls.
But turnout was actually incredibly low in South Dakota, and this is no offense to the NDGOP or the North Dakota Democratic and Yale parties have never been weaker as a structure. And that's not just in North Dakota, that's across the whole country. And that grinding out GOTV stuff is really where parties, deal with it. But I mean, I've got friends, all across the country running in runoffs. And I mean, you want to see low turnout, go look at a runoff election and trying to figure out those things. So I think I don't know why, but I think it's not unique to North Dakota, but we should try and figure out a way to make it get better.
And by the way, I actually went and looked up. I keep thinking that in my spreadsheet that I made that I have the 2024 numbers. I don't. 119,000 people turned out, according to the not yet quite official, but that's probably pretty close.
Yeah. So more than 2 years ago, which tracks right. But the early voting stuff was coming in late too, and we'd like to see more people vote.
Definitely. Do you think, one thing, because I wanted to ask you this too about the campaign. I mean, this year got ugly. I mean, some of the tactics, certainly in your race, we wrote about it where it was pretty brutal. And then even you look at the House race. I mean, some of the tactics deployed there were tough. We saw in some of the legislative races was pretty ugly. Do you think voters just get turned off by that and just don't want to show up?
I don't know. It'd be interesting, like, to pull the jury a little bit. And I don't think we spent, we talked about, obviously, as our race was going and everything like that, and you talk about the House race, 46% in a 5-way race is a big number.
Yeah. I
mean, it's a really big number. And particularly with lower turnout, I think it's a big number. And the old state party chair and coaching is like that. We shouldn't sleep on that. That was a pretty resounding win as well.
Kelly, election's over. I know historically the losing candidates would frequently call and speak to the winning candidate, congratulate, concede. Walk us through. Have you spoken with Lieutenant Governor Miller, with anyone from their office, and if so, how are those conversations been going?
Yeah, we're going to start on some of that next, but yes, Lieutenant Governor Miller called me. Josh Tigan called Michelle. They were complete pros. They did all that stuff. I'm not going to talk about the private conversations we had on that, but moving on. I flew back to DC at 7 a.m. the next morning. So this week we're in district. We're going to take some time and we got to learn what we don't know, right? And we still got to, we're going to run through the finish line in November too, but at the same time, we're going to, reset a little bit and start working on everything.
So I guess on that then, how do you and your campaign, and so as Rob had said, there was some pretty heated ads.
Sure.
And you've got an incumbent administration still in office. They're going to be in office until December 15th. There's going to be a transition. How do you pivot from being the candidate with the accusations of insider trading and standing up for people who shouldn't be free? How does this relationship work over the next several months as the favorites to be the next governor?
Well, I think first of all, transition doesn't start till after November. It can't. You can't pretend. You can't presume. You can't do anything. Learning and knowledge base can start before then. One, it makes you a better candidate. I'm assuming people are going to want to vote for a governor who actually knows, structurally how the executive branch works. And we do. I'm lucky. I was blessed to serve in the state Senate. But on the personality side, Corey, I'll just tell you, I don't take any of this stuff personally. I just don't. Campaigns are rough and tumble and all of that. And maybe I always tell people I practice criminal defense in small towns all across the state. I think I've been yelled at by every judge that I ever appeared in front of. All the witnesses were the same cops I dealt with all the time, all the prosecutors. My friend Jim Hope, who's still a state's attorney in Stark County, we used to get so mad at each other in trial. And then the next morning I'm in his office working on other cases and he's my friend. And you just can't take that stuff personally. Otherwise you're in the wrong line of work right now.
Kelly, and again, I know we've got a general election ahead of us. You're going to have Merrill Pepcorn, obviously, is the Democratic nominee. You're going to be campaigning against him. There's going to be a contrast of ideas. Assuming you win in November, what are your priorities coming in to a 4-year term at the head of the state of North Dakota?
Well, first one's property taxes. It has to be. It has to be. The benefit of being everywhere and talking and listening to people, you kind of start getting a pretty good idea of what really is driving angst, anger, frustration. And so but for me, this might sound silly, but we've had pretty good run of Republican legislators. Since 1992 and Ed Schaefer won all the way through. I want to sit down and talk to the chairs about what their priorities are. It doesn't matter if it's that. And then the other answer, and this administration's worked on it and all of those things, but my entire adult life watching politicians on both sides of the aisle in North Dakota, it's all about jobs, 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 right? Different ways, different deal with it, but Democratic candidates are about jobs. Republican candidates are about jobs. That's a very different conversation right now. We have 30,000 open jobs in North Dakota. 30,000. I think that number's about right.
We need work.
This is about workforce. We did a thing with UAS community in Fargo, and one of the people asked me what I could do to help increase the ecosystem of the UAS and the tech sector. In Fargo, I said, get you more cops, teachers, and nurses. We did this in the album. It's pretty hard to get young professionals to stay if they have 45 kids in a 4th grade class in a portable. It doesn't matter what you're in right now. You need power, you need water, you need affordable housing, you need daycare, you need cops, you need teachers, you need nurses. And that's a harder, campaigning on jobs is awesome. It is great, particularly, prior to the oil boom in the last 20 years. It's, trying to recruit and retain stuff here, trying to figure out how to get people here, how to keep kids here, how to do that is a harder conversation. So it's going to be fun because I get to talk to smart people at different levels of our economy and our, all the way across the state and get some ideas because we need some.
Kelly, the Burleigh County passed a property tax measure, pretty much 60-40, that would shift law enforcement and some of those direct expenses from property tax instead of using property taxes, assessing the sales tax. Are we going to see more of that? Is that part of the proposal? And also knowing that I feel like we're going to see that initiated measure on the property tax. We're going to see some news on that soon. And if that's on the ballot, I think it does. And if you look at what happened in Burleigh County, 60-40 to shift the cost from a property tax to a sales tax, I think the wind is to their back coming into November if that's on there. How do you use what happened in Burleigh as an example to either offer alternatives or even to prevent a property tax statewide measure from passing?
Yeah, I think if it passes, you have a real problem. I think, you're going to see we have enough out-of-state landowner issues. So it's a pretty good place to park an investment, particularly in an inflationary environment, right? Farmers, ranchers, guys who want rec land to come pheasant hunting or duck hunting. And then there's no contribution whatsoever. But I think the more important issue is Devil's Lake, Oaks, Belfield, New England. They don't have a city attorney. They share a senator with 7 other communities. They still need water. They still need their garbage picked up. They need cops. They need emergency medical service. They need firefighters and more. And they need school funding. And those guys are going to come to bank for their supper every 2 years in Bismarck. You're going to take. Just think of law enforcement. I always use this. If that's all coming over there, you think you're going to have any autonomy on what equipment you have? Or you think the state's going to determine what you're buying and how you're buying it and all of that? And so I get really concerned about it. The sales tax thing, I think we have to be a little careful of. Every single store in every community in North Dakota is competing in e-commerce. If you're not going to survive for the next 50 years. I don't care what. The exception of maybe your Ace Hardware, right? Like outside of that, whatever you're selling, if you're not competing and you don't have an e-commerce position going for you, can price some of these guys out of being able to compete in that marketplace. So that concerns me a little bit too. But it passed in Burleigh County. That type of stuff happens. I think that was, so that kind of thing. But if you're going for a 1 cent sales tax for every single thing you need in the community, and all of a sudden you're paying locally 22% sales tax, that might work at the gas station when you're buying the Mountain Dew on your way through. That's not really good for your retail brick and mortar stores on the corner of the street.
To Kelly's point, I think people are aware that we now do levy the sales tax on online purchases, but I believe that's only the state sales tax. Yeah. So that would be unless I guess the state did something to where we modified that law, that would be pretty.
But you all, we all know we have a ton of. We all order on Amazon too much or Target or all of that. The convenience of that stuff. But we also know a lot of people, including me, that try really hard to shop locally because I don't want to live in a world where the only place I can eat is McDonald's and the only place I can shop is Walmart. I just don't.
No.
And it's not that I don't go to both of those stores because I do. But we have a lot of people that are willing to help out and try and do that and build up a community. But at the same time, if you price them out of the marketplace, you got to be careful about that.
I have a Makita lawnmower, and I bent my blade last weekend, and so it wasn't mulching anymore, and my mower kept binding up. And I went on an hour-and-a-half odyssey through the hardware stores of Minot, North Dakota, trying to find a Makita blade that I could put on my electric lawnmower, and I ended up having to order it from Amazon because nobody had it. But I tried. I did try first.
And by the way, Amazon's not sponsoring a Little League baseball team.
Yeah, I think
it's the bank or the diner that is doing those things. Like that's who are your people in your community that do all the things that you want to have in your community.
I think that's kind of the problem with property taxes is it's hard to find a one-size-fits-all solution for it that works. So maybe shifting some costs to sales tax, maybe that works in Bismarck. I don't know. I don't live in Bismarck. The voters voted for it. Maybe that makes sense, but I don't know that that works at Oaks, which isn't going to have anywhere approaching the sales tax base that Bismarck does.
Well, and I think we have a different challenge for some of our smaller communities, which also becomes a political challenge in the legislature. Those guys get priced out of stuff just on cost share. Like Bismarck can do a 10% cost share. Grand Forks can do a 20% cost share. But you start, and we're not talking about sexy stuff. We're talking about water and sewer. And so, and you're going to, in the school districts in those scenarios actually do a little better because it's county. But, I've said this a lot. It used to be when you farmed outside of Oaks and you retired, you moved into Oaks. Now you move to Fargo or Scottsdale. But that community is still the economic hub of that area, and they have less and less tax base within their own community. County jails, we got to deal with some different issues in infrastructure and those kind of things, and, to varying degrees. So we're going to have, but I can't imagine we're going to have pretty good relationships with the legislature if we want to get creative with that. Because in some instances, you might ask Grand Forks, Fargo, Bismarck, and Minot to vote against their parochial interests. Right? If none of the other communities can meet the cost share, where do you think most of the money goes?
And you bring up the point. If we shift things more and more of these expenses, these base expenses, to your sales tax, you're already seeing smaller towns. People are consolidating their trips to nearby hubs. People in Leeds driving to Devil's Lake, where they're getting more groceries and gas and picking up prescriptions and going to the hardware store to get a replacement on their Makita lawnmower blade or whatever. They're making those trips. Well, that's a sales tax. If that's the model that we shift to or see more of that, that's going to benefit Devil's Lake, but it's not going to benefit Leeds or Minnewacan or Sandu.
Sorry, Kelly, I wanted. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. I wanted to ask you about something in the job that you're going to be concluding here at the end of the year, which is in Congress. I saw recently the Speaker of the House came out in favor of legislation that would allow sitting or former presidents to shift their criminal
into federal court. Yeah,
into federal court. Are you? I was curious what your position was on that.
Yeah, do you know that we allow Congress and judges to do it already? We're the only branch of government that doesn't do it is the executive branch. There's already a mechanism for members of Congress and judges to do it. I don't have a problem with it, mostly because just as somebody who's practiced in both state and federal court, you'd have to. I always tell people, if you ever get charged with a crime, you want to be charged with a state crime, not a federal crime. The difference. So the scenarios in which you would want to do it was you think you're going to have a better jury pool or a more fair jury pool and all of those things. But it already exists for the other two branches of government. I don't have a problem with doing it.
Elaborate on that. What are the situations and what is the mechanism? What triggers that? How does a member of Congress, remember the judiciary, how does that?
The defendant in the case has the option of removing it to federal court for judges and members of Congress now. And I don't know. I don't know why the executive branch has never been in it before. I haven't done legislative history or anything on it, but we allow it for 2 of the 3 branches of government now. It's an opt-in for the defendant. I suppose in New York that would have probably happened with Trump, just given the dynamics of it. But I can't imagine it. I'm just telling you from practicing criminal law for 10 years, there are very few scenarios in code that I could think you are benefited from. Jury selection's more robust in federal court. There's some. And if you're a high-profile defendant, the more robust your jury selection is and your voir dire process, it could make some sense.
I know that the Trump's lawyers, I think in at least 2 of his cases, have tried to remove it to. I think the Georgia case and the New York case have tried to remove it to federal court. Obviously, unsuccessfully in the New York case. I believe the Georgia case, there might be going before the U.S. Supreme Court, if I'm remembering right. I guess one of the things was what Speaker Johnson said. It was talking about a 2-tier system of justice, and it would end some of the unfairness. I guess I objected to that a little bit. I'm not so sure I like the Congress and federal judges can move it to federal court. I don't understand why an American who commits an alleged crime in the state of North Dakota shouldn't face North Dakota justice. What's the matter with our courts?
I don't think there is anything the matter with your courts, but you're dealing also with federal government officials and dealing with capacity, personal, all of those different issues. So, my number one goal for all of this is to have the best and most robust ability to have a fair trial. So if a defendant thinks they have the ability to do that because they're a federal government position and would rather be in federal court, I would not support anything that mandates that to happen. But if you're allowing if you're allowing the defendant to say, I'm a federal officer, I'm the president of the United States, I'm going to get a larger jury pool, and just that alone gives me an answer. It gives me the ability to be able to pick a more fair and impartial jury. I don't have a problem.
How does it work in cases where so is it the federal court then that's enforcing state law?
Yeah, whenever you remove, it's the same thing when you take a case out of state law to the U.S. Supreme Court. They're interpreting the constitutionality almost always of what the state statute is.
Well, I guess that answers that question. I'm not so sure I like it. I wrote a whole column about it. It seems from a federalist perspective, we already have too many federal crimes. We already have too much. I don't understand why somebody shouldn't face justice in North Dakota for a North Dakota crime, or New York, or
Could you not shift it from one state to another instead of changing from state to federal?
No, you can't. If you're violating a state statute, if you're charged under a state statute, which, like in the New York case, right, you have a misdemeanor business records exemption and a misdemeanor interfering with an election question, 2 state court cases that are combined to somehow get you past the statute of limitations, which we could do another hour and a half on. But those are still the laws you're doing. You just remove it to federal court.
But in this case, you're talking about, it's just being heard that they're still enforcing the state law at the federal court level.
Yeah, you're removing it.
Couldn't you do the same with another state? Minnesota is then interpreting or charging in North Dakota at the request for jury pool or whatever reason if the defendant is looking for that.
Yeah, well, change of venue is a different conversation. I actually think this is probably a simpler and more refined way to deal with that, like a jury pool. And guys, I'm not famous enough in North Dakota. I can't imagine trying to pick a jury if you're Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, any of those guys. But also remember, like for Congress, there are a lot of districts that are like 5 blocks in diameter. Your concentration of your population. I can see how a member of Congress from an urban district, and particularly if you're like in a really bad campaign with a lot of negative ads on TV, right? Like just imagine that has all happened, and now you're now you got to try and pick a jury in that area. Removing it to federal court allowing for a more robust process. It doesn't bother me. I'm always in favor of defendants having options.
Well,
I wish I had more when I did criminal defense.
Fair enough. Well, Kelly, I think we'll put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
The cold cases you see at The Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At The Vault Podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
We'll just finish up with Kelly Armstrong, and a good interview overall. I'm really interested in what his approach to property taxes are going to be, because I don't think the property tax measure is going to pass. And I'm saying that, I understand the wind's going to be at their backs. But I don't think it's going to pass because I don't think it's a good solution. I think people are upset about their property taxes, but I think they also want a good solution to their property taxes, and just getting rid of them is not it, because we get rid of them, I think we're going to end up with a regime that's worse. And I don't know that shifting it to sales taxes at a time where everybody's upset about inflation and how everything is costing more and more, the sticker shock, because I'm betting the turnout in Bismarck was like the turnout in the rest of the state, where you have a very small minority of voters who just made this decision. I'm waiting for the majority to start showing up at the stores in Bismarck and getting some sticker shock about what that's going to look like. So I don't know that that's a good solution. Certainly that's not a solution that could be replicated around the state. So, and obviously the legislature, endlessly trying to buy down property taxes has not been working. As we had a debate about that in the context of Governor Burgum, pushing to cut income taxes, which I supported. I didn't think we should have done anything on property taxes because the thing that they were proposing to do doesn't work. So I'm going to be really interested. Is there another way? Is there another idea out there? I'm hoping Armstrong can find it.
We need to have those top of the tickets have to come out with concrete ideas. There's no way. Otherwise, you're running against a theoretical solution. We've spent the last 20 years trying to come up with means to lower property taxes. Everything from fully funded K-12. We're shifting social service spending from the county to the state level.
We shifted
K-12
spending.
Yep, buying down just blank checks to buy down mills, and it's not relief. It is property tax subsidies. You're buying down essentially you're giving the money to the county, but you have no control over the total bottom line. It's as a legislature, we're just cutting a check in hopes that political subdivision is going to match that dollar for dollar as a reduction. And to show you how difficult that's been, I forget how many years ago, the legislature mandated that we put a line item on every property tax statement that specified legislative tax relief, because we weren't all hundreds of millions of dollars spent on tax relief. It wasn't coming through. We were still hearing people complain that taxes were too high, and they were blaming legislators for not doing anything. So we put in a bill to say, hey, county auditors, you have to give us credit for the tax relief that they're not getting.
Yeah, it's very problematic because, again, it's just not coming through. And I mean, and maybe this is too simplistic, but I think we've got to be very careful to protect the relationship between the size of government and the cost of government, especially at the local. I mean, we're obviously disconnected from reality at the federal level. Thankfully, at the state level in North Dakota, we have a requirement that the budget has to balance. At the local level, I don't want to create a situation where, locals can expand government and then the price tag gets hidden in some other budget somewhere else. That worries me. I like the idea that we're going to have a debate. Okay, if we want to have a new pool, then we got to pay for it. And a sales tax is going to go up, or a property tax, or the fire department. Do we need another fire department? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But we're going to have a debate about it. And one of the trade-offs of that debate is we build another fire department and hire more firefighters and buy them more equipment. That's going to hit property taxes. I mean, taxpayers should have that cost-benefit debate. And I worry that increasingly the solution is we're just going to shift this burden to a different budget, especially in North Dakota, where you can hide a lot of things in those oil tax revenues that flow into state coffers. I realize it's limited to the general fund, but we spend out of the special funds too. That's been part of the problem. And I feel like something that just gets overlooked in the property tax. Everyone's looking for the solution. The solution is taxpayers, you may have to you might either just accept the higher taxes because the money went to things you don't need, or you're going to have to give up on some of the things you're spending on and not spend on them and live with that. And I feel like part of the problem is maybe, and nobody wants to blame the taxpayers for anything ever, but maybe that's part of the problem is, hey, taxpayers, you got to have one or the other. You can't have low property taxes and new fire departments and water parks and all the other things. It's one or the other.
I would trip over all of the political ads that we've seen over the years of candidates running to cut the bureaucracy. We're going to have more efficient budgets. That's their solution. It's not raise taxes. It's not reduce services. Every candidate that I've seen run for office, probably myself included, has spent the bulk of their time increasing services, better funding for schools and roads and police and fire. And by the way, we're going to cut your taxes. And the numbers don't add up. We're living in a jet-fueled economy thanks to oil. We're able to afford this lifestyle because we're living off of a tax that most North Dakotans don't pay directly. It's an oil tax. And as you said, Rob, those taxes they're buried. It's in formulas. Some of it is through the general fund. There's a lot through other funds. We've got a $19 billion budget.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is coming from oil.
I was listening to a legislative debate up here in Minot. It's in District 38. And Wolf, who's the candidate who won, who beat Lisa Olson, who's a longtime city commissioner, what she was saying during the debate was essentially she wanted to use the legacy fund. She wanted to grow the legacy fund to the point where the revenues from the legacy fund could just replace all our taxes. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I kind of know why. First of all, I don't think that's possible. I mean, I don't know how you grow the legacy fund to the point where it's kicking off billions to the point where we could replace all of our general fund revenues. I don't think that's feasible. But
not in the short term, and not with spending any of the earnings.
Right. But on the other hand, I don't know that I want it. Like I want North Dakotans to pay for their government. I want that. I think that's a healthy thing to have a relationship with the size of your government and its costs. I believe in I think everybody should pay at least a little tax. And when the government gets bigger, everybody's taxes should go up commensurate with that. That's the ideal. Now, I realize achieving that is a lot more complicated, but I think that relationship between your government and what it costs you is very, very important. It's very healthy for a society.
Think of buying war bonds. Yeah, the idea of having a conflict and we're fighting a foreign war. Soldiers are going across World War II, everything else. Buy war bonds. There is a direct cost. That's how we funded those military operations through your taxes, but it was also, pay, buy, help, support the troops, support this. We've got to win this war. We've created that separation. We're no longer paying cash up front for the services we have. We've been able to bury it in credit cards and bond for the future, and that separation that keeps us at arm's length from the true cost of the service and the benefits of the service themselves. And
I think you could even say this is one of the factors that contributes to how rancorous, and it's certainly not just in North Dakota but nationally, how rancorous politics has become, is because people don't really, because we can just kind of gloss over these cost-benefit debates about government and just say, well, the government ought to do this, the government ought to do that, because when the government does it, most of the voters aren't really going to feel anything by it, either because we're going to try to tax like some small, unpopular constituency to pay for it, or we just won't pay for it at all, and we'll just pay for it with by putting it on the credit card and adding to the national debt. There's like there's something that's grounding about that. Like, okay, if you want to do this, it's going to cost this. It brings you down to reality, right? You go shopping to a car and visions are running through your head about getting a Mercedes-Benz or something. And then you get there and you realize, no, I got a Corolla budget. That forces you to live in reality. And we're not doing a lot of that in American politics right now. And I think it's part of what's killing us.
I'm nervous about how the next several years are going to set the stage with how the legacy fund looks and grows and what it does for generations. And getting into the weeds, that's something that I could do over a couple of drinks with a smaller group. The larger podcast audience has done nothing wrong, so much so to deserve me getting into the weeds on the legacy fund. But we're still paying in, and it's growing. And you look at the growth; it's not all investment growth. we're still cutting $50 million checks into the legacy fund every month. And then it's growing by 60 million. And we act as though this thing is just up and to the right. It's growing faster than we ever thought possible. So let's start spending it now. We've done some things to smooth our spending on the earnings. We're putting ourselves on 225 million of the earnings go to tax relief, state funds to buy down local taxes, and then other interests. And we're putting some towards the closing out the pension. We're gonna be very reliant on that legacy fund, and it's not going to add a lot of tangible value to the day-to-day lives of people. And at some point, voters are going to be upset, and they're going to want this back. They're going to, why is this legacy fund not being used to improve my life today? If it's not here, a vision for 20 years from now, I want the benefit today. And this isn't there.
You're talking about the original sin. We are so far off topic, but you were talking about the original sin of the legacy fund is that we started this exercise and seeing how high we could stack money without defining any real purpose for it, which way back in the day when we put the legacy fund on the ballot, I opposed it from the perspective of I don't want the government taking money just to hoard it. Without if we've got a purpose, like, okay, we need a reserve fund if a natural disaster or something happens. Sure. Or you're going to take my money because we're going to the Common Schools Trust Fund and we want to have money available because, we need to build schools and do things. Fine. I'm even so far let's create a big pot of money that we can bond out of. We can bond our own projects and lend the money out and then have, so a local government needs to build a new sewage treatment plant. They can borrow from the state of North Dakota from the legacy fund and then pay it back, but we can charge ourselves lower interest and make the terms work better for the taxpayers. I'm all for that. But we created the legacy fund, and we didn't give it a real purpose other than something nebulous like it'll be for our legacy. And surprise, what constitutes a legacy project is a very subjective thing that varies wildly from person to person. I never liked it. We have it now. I want to use it responsibly now that we have it, but
we got to be careful. The management of it is Alaska. They overcommitted on their funds, and Rob, I know you are no stranger to the Alaska Permanent Oil Trust Fund.
I have received permanent fund dividend checks, but I will tell you, everybody compares it to Alaska. Alaska's fund is not the same thing. It's not based on tax revenues. The Alaska Fund is actually like the Common Schools Trust Fund. What goes into the Alaska Fund are royalties from what the state owes. I have a problem even with, and I would argue we may even have a problem with the gift clause. If we tried doing something like what Alaska does, where we're taking taxpayers from one group of people, in this case the oil industry, and just redistributing them to other people, I'm pretty sure that's illegal under North Dakota law. I don't think you can just do that.
No, I don't think so either. But
also we've been very flexible with our use of our view of the gift clause in the past. So, what do I know? It just says what it says, unless the court reads it, and then I guess it says something else.
I do find it entertaining that you've already said we're so far off topic. I'm not entirely sure what you have expected. I don't know how you thought I would be any different than Chad in terms of
keeping things
on or off topic.
Thing we do. I don't help the cause at all. I don't know. We're talking about the primaries. I thought Kelly's answers about how ugly and negative things got. I mean, obviously he's got nothing to gain from dwelling on that. The primary's over. Right. He's moving on. I do think that as North Dakota citizens, there's a question there. I was the one thing I was glad on primary night is a lot of the most negative ads, the most ugly, underhanded tactics lost. Tammy Miller lost. I think she was probably going to lose anyway, but she lost. Rick Becker lost. I don't know who was responsible for those text messages that were trying to convince people that Julie Fedorchak had pulled out of the race or that Democrats should cross over and vote for Becker. I don't know who was responsible for those. I don't know if it was Rick Becker, but I mean, they were certainly to the benefit of Rick Becker. I'm glad he paid a price for that. I'm glad, even whether he was responsible or not, that's the way it works. You know, he paid a price for that. Brandon Pritchard, not only did he lose his election, now there were like 90 some ballots still in that district that hadn't been mailed in yet. It is still theoretically possible that he could win. It's deeply, deeply unlikely. Usually a lot of those ballots that haven't come in yet, they end up just not coming in. So we'll see what happens there, but I'm pretty sure he's lost.
Yes, some of his efforts where there was backfiring.
Right.
Yeah, Pritchard's group targeting Jeremy Olson. Well, what did they get? They targeted Jeremy Olson to get him out of District 26. Instead, Jeremy Olson wins, and the other incumbent who had tried to take advantage of the affiliation with the senator, Kelby Timmons, lost. He got squeezed out. And the same situation up in Grand Forks at District 42. Trying to go after Emily O'Brien, and Emily O'Brien came out ahead. And I think as you and Chad had said earlier this week, those races are now competitive into the fall.
There are in the 18, so Brandon Pritchard's group, Citizens Alliance for North Dakota, endorsed and spent money supporting 18 Republican candidates in competitive primaries. I'm not counting the ones where they endorsed somebody who didn't have an opponent. So just the competitive races, he had 18. He won 4 of them, but of those 4, one of the victories was Mackey in District 26, where basically Mackey replaces Timmons, who was another one. So I don't even.
It was a trade.
That's not even that's a trade. That's not even a pickup. And one of the other ones was Sue Ann Olson in District 8, who beat Pritchard. Now Sue Ann Olson was also, and she's obviously a political ally of Pritchard, but I mean, neither of those really count because you lost. You know, in the net, you at least barely didn't gain anything. So I was very happy that those tactics failed. And I hope that what that means is that in future cycles, people won't try them because they'll find out, like, this doesn't work. This tactic doesn't work.
I hope that's the case. I hope that this is the end of that chapter, but I'm not as optimistic. We talk about this a lot, that sometimes, I say we as the larger sense, and you've got eccentric legislation that could have detrimental effects.
The best euphemism yet I've heard from the culture war bill. Eccentric.
Yeah. Let's where it gets so watered down, and it's to appease it, so you can pass it. It has little effect, so you try to give everybody a win, and the voters don't feel the pain because of the true consequences that would have happened had the original intent carried through. I'm worried that all we've done is reinforced the status quo, that you can have that negative campaigning, you can have petulance, you can have this divisiveness, and then voters, they've seen the result. They won't get, quote, crazy legislators elected. They haven't experienced what a Bastiat majority legislature looks like. So there's not a compelling reason for your traditional Republicans, the normies, is you've been calling them on the podcast, for them to re-engage and try to, quote, take the party back. I worry that this is the victory that allows everybody, your establishment, to just relax, to rest on their laurels, and not try to regain control of the larger establishment.
I mean, because the thing is that the normies didn't make up any ground. They just held what they had, really. And arguably, depending on how, maybe some of these general election races go, the Bastiat culture warrior faction, I mean, could gain a couple. So, the thing is, the problem is still there, to your point. I think that's the point you're trying to make. The problem's still there. And what I'm worried that, they're going to think, well, the the wave has crested and it's over and things are going to get back to normal. I think there's a couple problems with that. One, the Trump era's not over. He could very well win another term in the White House. And if you're, I mean, that is, by the way, something that a lot of Republicans don't want to talk about, is how many of these tactics are flowing down from the national level, from Trumpism. I mean, I wrote a column back looking at young Republicans like Brandon Pritchard, like Cole Christensen, although he's left now, looking at Representative Matt Heilman from, the Bismarck area, Representative Nico Rios, and how much they're emulating Donald Trump in the way they behave on social media, in the way they talk, in their campaign tactics, where it's kind of like, we're not ever going to apologize for anything. We're going to do whatever we think is going to redound to our benefit in the moment, and never admit you're wrong, never admit you're sorry, never do any of that. That cutthroat approach comes from Donald Trump, and those are kids who grew up in the Trump era. 2016, Brandon Pritchard was still in high school. They grew up in the Trump era. So, I worry that generation is still with us. And I'm very happy on election night. I do think it was a repudiation, but I mean, okay, you stopped the progress. Now we need things to go back the other way, and that's going to take a fight. And I think Republicans need to take their party back. North Dakota Republicans need to take their party back.
I would agree, and I, we could have another conversation on this. I don't think the mainstream Republican looks at Rick Becker and says he's a Republican. I don't think they see a Brandon Pritchard and say he's a Republican. And the irony is it's those candidates, it's those people who are referring to the John Nelsons and the Jerry Kleins and the Brandy Piles as rhinos. Yeah, they're calling them rhinos. They're Republicans in name only. The reality is no, they are Republican classic. I mean, that's what Republicans were. Your Karen Krebsbach, a Republican. Yeah, true. I mean,
was winning legislative races in Minot since the Reagan administration. Now she didn't. She's retiring. She didn't run for re-election. But.
Right, but it's to say that she is not a Republican is your
which she was, by the way. She was censured by her home district, and the district chair in her home district called her a Democrat.
Yeah. And the frustration I have is the way our laws are set up is we encourage, if you want to be politically relevant in North Dakota, we're a duopoly. It's one or the other. There are third parties that occasionally exist, libertarians, whatever, but it's not set up for a libertarian or any other third party candidate to have viability in a general election.
Yeah,
we're the only state that limits the ability for a third-party legislative candidate to move on. We haven't had a third-party legislative candidate in North Dakota since 1976.
You and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, and the law you're referring to is there's a minimum. You have to get a minimum number of votes on the June primary ballot to advance to the general election, and it's like 1% of what it would take. It's 1%.
It's the same number you'd need to get on the ballot in the first place. So if you need 1% of your population in terms of signatures as a petition, you need to get that same number of votes in the primary.
So it might be 100, 160, 150 votes, signatures, right, or something like that. Or the votes. That's what you have to get to advance. And if you don't advance, you
right,
can't. Even if you gather signatures, you can't appear because we have the sore losers
exactly
too.
So
so I'm fine with getting rid of that. Some of the complaining about like third parties, to me, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, because they say, well, we can't win because we have these minimum thresholds. Well, maybe you also can't win because you don't have enough support to meet the minimum thresholds. It becomes problematic. I mean, maybe the Libertarian Party has never done that well in North Dakota because most North Dakotans aren't libertarians.
Well, probably not. But then, then what's the alternative? Then you take someone who has an emerging or a minority viewpoint, and you say, since you can't even offer your candidacy on a legislative race Because, even you've got a lot of voters.
I'm not defending that law. I would be fine with getting rid of the minimum law.
Yeah, no, but that's been the problem, and so then the incentive is to take over an establishment party, to tread on the reputation and good name of an existing party, and that's what's happened.
I would be fine with making some reforms to ballot access laws and making it easier for third-party candidates. And I tell you that even after we made those reforms, what we are not going to see is some revolution for third parties. Because I would argue that there's a reason why a lot of them don't get traction in the first place, because they are representing very, very minority viewpoints.
I would be very curious to see how some of the legislative candidates, so if you took a Kelby Timmons and a Jeremy Olson, Jeremy as a Republican, Kelby Timmons as Bastiat, whatever the party they chose, and put them on the ballot, throw a token Dem on there, how that vote would shake out. I think it would be very interesting to see the candidates. Yeah, you've got your coach was saying normie, but you've got your Republican classic, you've got the neo-conservatives, whatever they are, and then you've got.
Well, because political party positions evolve over time too. I mean, that's the other thing, is that one reason why, because a third party or a minority point of view starts approaching a majority, usually one of the two major parties will adopt those viewpoints, which is in a lot of ways is what's happened with the Republican Party, where we have moved away from sort of the free trade, free market ideas back to more of a sort of what would have been the Republican Party that a Calvin Coolidge would have recognized, that was very isolationist, very protectionist in its nature. I mean, that's really what it's becoming. So, I mean, and the Democratic Party obviously has evolved over time too. I mean, there was, we could talk about where the Democratic Party was during the civil rights era. Maybe not in such a great place sometimes. So, I mean, these things evolve over time, and that's interesting. And I'm for allowing for flexibility too, to allow room for those evolutions. But the thing about the evolving of the North Dakota Republican Party is that I just don't think it's genuine. I don't think it's really reflective of where most North Dakota, voters are, given the fact that convention rejected Kirsten Baszler, who just got over 50% on the June primary ballot. They reject, and by the way, the candidate they did endorse, Jim Bartlett, took a distant third. They rejected Julie Fedorchak, really. And frankly, if Rick Becker had been able to be on the ballot at that convention, Rick Becker's the nominee. So, but Julie Fedorchak just won, almost got a majority in a 5-way race, which, as our guest of the first part of the show, Kelly Armstrong, said, is remarkable. I don't think that I think that faction of the party thinks that they're representative of North Dakota Republicans, and they're not.
At some point, and I hope sooner than later, both parties, but more specifically the Republican Party, your legislative leaders, in this, your governor, whoever's the top of the party, begin to prioritize ideology over the brand, the name, the party itself, because they, by remaining loyal to the R and not the ideology behind the R, they're elevating the Brandon Pritchards and the Jim Caspers and those, they're allowing them to ascend and to hold those positions of power, positions of leadership, all while they're fighting internally, while they're almost
that's how we end up. I mean, the national level is always like the easiest place to have an example, but that's how we end up with a Republican Party that once impeached Bill Clinton for lying about a sexual dalliance in the Oval Office, organizing themselves and showing up to show quote unquote moral support for Donald Trump in a trial which, regardless of whether you agree about statute of limitations or should it be a felony, should he be charged criminally for it, what remains without question is that he had affairs with 2 porn stars and then manipulated his business and campaign records in order to cover them up. should that be a crime or not? I don't know. We could have a debate about the legal niceties. As a matter of moral behavior, he did it. And it's wrong. But yet there are Republicans, say, oh, we got to support Donald Trump. Like, I don't know. Like, I kind of, sometimes I don't want to turn into ideologues, but on the other hand, like, I want us to have some principles again, like some inviolate principles. Like, if you do this, if you cross this line, you're out. And here locally, if we want an example, somehow Representative Nico Rios from Williston is still in office, despite verbally abusing 2 law enforcement officers with hateful, homophobic, bigoted language for the better part of an hour. And tried to use his position, was like, oh, you don't know who I am. I'm going to call the attorney general, all this stuff, which, by the way, he would have gotten no traction with the attorney general at all. But, tried to sort of do that. He's still in office. He hasn't been recalled. And even calling him, Mike LaFleur, his district almost didn't get its delegates seated at the state convention, I think, because he came out and called for Nico Rios to resign. So I don't know. Like, I would like to get back to a party that has standards again.
I think just having the institution have standards, because it's not just the Republican Party. North Dakota, it's more of the issue, but Minnesota, you've got Democratic candidates or office holders that, I forget her name, but she's that senator.
She just stands accused of burglary, basically.
Right. And I.
So Senator Bob Menendez at the national level is still in office.
He's an embarrassment. Bob Menendez, I cringe when I think of him still holding office. And as an elected Dem.
Representative Matt Gaetz is still in office despite everything. We did get rid of George Santos, which, hallelujah.
Yeah.
But, I would like Shane to be back in politics again. I say that, like, I don't really like this year where people have to be, like, ashamed of their lifestyle or ashamed. Like, I'm glad we're not as judgmental in some ways as we once were. But in other ways, I kind of wish we were more judgmental again.
I looked at this through a couple lenses, and the one to gun control. When someone does something stupid with a firearm, takes innocent lives, the people have the most to lose in that situation are the victims themselves. The second most, people have the second most to lose are gun owners, because it reflects poorly on legal, law-abiding gun owners. I'm a gun owner, and it makes me look bad when somebody else does something horrible with a firearm. Politicians are the same thing. People don't separate it. They don't see us necessarily as individuals. When one politician is corrupt and stashing gold bars from a foreign country that they bought, trading votes and influence, that makes me and every other politician look bad, even though I'm nowhere near that. And we need to start being far quicker to hold our colleagues accountable, to say, that is inappropriate, get out.
Yeah.
You're making us look bad. You're hurting our brand.
That's right.
We're trying to do something good. And unfortunately, this tribalism of the party, that was bad. We'll dance around a justification for someone because they're on our team, and then we'll throw them to the lion's den if it's someone on the other team.
How about it's just wrong? It doesn't matter what they're. I mean, so something they're just wrong, and it doesn't matter what their partisan affiliation is.
I would agree, and then we don't have enough political courage to call balls and strikes. We have to play this team game, and I really hope that we can get through this sooner or later. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic that, let's say Kelly wins in November. He's got a positive relationship with a lot of legislators. I think North Dakota would be well served if Kelly tries to bridge those ideologies.
I think North Dakota would be well served with a governor who understands the legislature a little bit better than Doug Burgum did. Yeah, I think Doug Burgum always saw the legislature as a division of North Dakota Incorporated, and he's the CEO, and it just doesn't work that way.
We're the board of directors.
I mean, really, and I think Kelly's going to win in November, but if Merrill Pepcorn won, frankly, you'd get the same thing. He's a sitting lawmaker
I would agree.
currently. So I think you would see probably a better relationship with the legislature out of him too if he wins. Anyway, well, we got to put a stop to the show because we've gone over time. Corey, thank you so much for sitting in. I hope we could do this again.
I hope so. My pleasure. I'm gonna practice my Dodger talk so that we can keep this thing going. The last thing I want is all 8 listeners to miss out on the Yankee Dodger banter that occurs at the end of your podcast.
I think it's you are really optimistic if you think we have 8 people who are still listening to this at this point.
You're probably not wrong. I have 8 people who even after the teaser you gave on Wednesday, this said that I was your guest host. This might be the lowest.
We'll see how it performs. We'll have to see how it performs after I upload it. Some programming notes. There won't be any shows next week. I think I mentioned this before. I'm going to be on vacation. I figure Oban's almost perpetually on vacation. I may as well take one as well. So we're going to have no shows next week.
What I will do, though, is I will talk endlessly for 1 hour twice next week. So if there's anybody within my general vicinity, we could just call it an unofficial podcast episode.
Just go stand in front of the mirror.
I won't record it. Yeah. It's like if you're in the car with me, my kids might be...
You tease a little bit. I walk around, and my family will tell you, like, I talk to myself. And, like people ask, like, who is Rob talking to? And just my wife will just be like, he's writing something in his head. He's okay. That's just what I do. So no shows next week. Obviously, you won't see any columns or anything from me. The week after that, I'll be back to normal, but just take a little break after that. At times with excruciating primary. Anyway, so thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. We'll talk again.